Hello, I'm Jen Mercer-Dahms, the Vice President of U.S. Development with Join Mayshad. We are an ecosystem of brands for women, by women, connecting women to each other and to the companies, causes, and organizations that champion equity for women professionally and personally. Today, you're with us watching our Diversity, Equity, Inclusion show brought to you each and every Tuesday afternoon. Please make sure to join us at joinmayshad.com, become a member, join our sisterhood, and together we will revolutionize how professional women connect, engage, and do business together. Please also make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and make sure to ring the bell to receive notifications of all of our content. I'm thrilled and honored to introduce to the stage today Dr. Feranmi Okanlami. Hi, Feranmi, welcome.
Hi, Jane. Thanks for having me.
You're so welcome. So Feranmi, we have so much to talk about, and I want to dive quickly deep into your own personal narrative. And that's something that for us at Mayshad, we talk extensively about the intersectionality of identity and the importance and relevancy of our backstories and our personal histories and narratives in the sense of what got us to where we are today. Would you please share with us your own personal story of how you became a doctor?
Certainly. Thank you for that. And thank you for this platform and this opportunity to join you all. So my story usually starts a bit far back where I talk about my parents. My parents are from Nigeria, and both of them are physicians. And so I was born in Nigeria before we came to the country when I was just about 3 years old for my parents to pursue their postgraduate education. They had to redo their residency training, and they did so at Howard University, where they both did pediatrics residency over again. And then my mother went to Johns Hopkins to do her pediatric critical care fellowship, and my father to Georgetown, where he did his neonatal intensive care fellowship. After that, we then moved to the Midwest, to Indiana, where I went to elementary school. And then we moved, and at least I moved, to the West Coast, or the west side of the East Coast in Massachusetts, and went to boarding school at Deerfield Academy in Massachusetts. I then ended up at Stanford University for undergrad, where I continued playing sports and singing and dancing and doing all sorts of different extracurricular activities, president of my class, captain of the track team, and considered taking a year off and training for the Olympics. But my Nigerian family had other plans, and I went directly to medical school instead. Now, I had a little caveat there that there was no guarantee that I would have gone to the Olympics. I said I would have taken a year off to train for the Olympics, and those are very different things. So I then ended up 4 years at medical school in Michigan, and then matched into orthopedic surgery residency at Yale. And it was in my third year of residency at Yale that I actually experienced a spinal cord injury, which left me paralyzed from my chest down with minimal use of my upper extremities. I had 2 surgeries at Yale and then went back to the Midwest again to Chicago at what was then called the Rehabilitation Institute of Chicago, which is now the Shirley Ryan Abilities Lab. And there I did my acute inpatient rehabilitation and was blessed with some return of motor function before being discharged and going back to Indiana, where then I completed a master's degree in engineering, science, and technology entrepreneurship from Notre Dame, finished a family medicine residency at Memorial Hospital at Beacon Health System in South Bend, was appointed to the St. Joseph County Board of Health by Mayor Pete Buttigieg, and then returned to Michigan, where I went to medical school, where I am now, as an assistant professor of family medicine, physical medicine and rehabilitation, and urology. And I'm the interim director of services for students with disabilities, and the director of adaptive sports and fitness in the Division of Student Life, and then the director of adaptive sports at Michigan Center for Human Athletic Medicine and Performance.
That's incredible. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. I'm wondering, from your own, the way in which, your injury has impacted and better informed your work as a physician and everything else that you're doing right now. You mentioned that I think it's 1 in 4 physicians. Let me just get that. David, hang on for 1 second. I need to get my quotes different here. Okay. We edit as well, so we'll pick back up on that.
No worries.
We know that 1 in 4 Americans suffer from some sort of disability, yet less than 3% are actually attending physicians. Talk to us a bit about how your own experience with your injury has better informed the work that you now do as a physician yourself.
That's a great question, Jan. I'll acknowledge and admit that prior to entering this world of disability myself, I did not recognize the limited access that individuals living with disabilities have, and how we truly still have structural barriers and stigmas that prevent, sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally, individuals with disabilities from having full access to the same opportunities that others have. So even as an orthopedic surgery resident that took care of patients with spinal cord injuries and disabilities, I did not fully understand what that world was like. And so now, living, as I say, on the other side of the stethoscope, And having had this experience as both patient and physician, I feel as though it gives me an opportunity to be able to understand and empathize with my patients in a way that I could not fully do prior to that. And I've seen how our world in general and medicine specifically are still not very understanding of or welcoming of individuals with disabilities. And as I said, sometimes it's intentional, just pure discrimination. But I think that oftentimes it's just due to lack of familiarity, and people don't realize that they are actively contributing to either an ableist or a racist or a sexist, system just by living their own daily lives and not realizing how other people are being left out. So I think it's a nuanced conversation, because as we can see in the media nowadays, everything is so very polarizing, and it's difficult to have a conversation amongst people without seeming to have to take sides on something. And so with this, truly, disability is a wonderful framework for this, because disability is ubiquitous. It does not discriminate based on race or gender, ethnicity, or political affiliation. And I think that one of the things I'm trying to show people is that by supporting disability, you are truly supporting the diversity of all humans, because all of us either has or will have something that qualifies as being disabled at some point in our lives. And so that's something that when people think of it in that way, you realize that you're not just supporting some small, minority group, which is between 20 and 25% of the population we say currently identifies as being disabled. You're truly supporting everyone by creating equal access for those individuals. So I think medicine is just one field in which that's a problem, but it's truly just an example of what's happening in the greater world itself.
It's interesting. We talk a lot about, in the professional corporate world, about diversity, equity, and inclusion through the lens of unconscious bias and the ways in which we often don't know what we don't know, right? And so there are ways in which, of course, people act in racist, homophobic, sexist, classist ways, ageist ways. But then there are also instances where we just don't know, right? That the privilege and the power that we have coming into a situation unless we're really checking that at the door. And it sounds like there's a space for us to learn more about how unconscious bias really plays into how we think about, the special needs of people who are disabled.
Yeah, interestingly, I'll jump on something you just said. So a few weeks or months ago, I made a comment that said that I don't like the term special needs. And too often, what happens now is people take a snippet of what you say and then they interpret it out of context. And so people were up in arms because they saw this clip of me saying that I don't like the word special needs, and that I said, individuals with disabilities don't have any special needs. They have the same needs as everybody else. They have the right to live, the right to love, the right to work and play. And so I don't want people to think that by providing access to those things, you are doing something special. All you are doing is providing the same things that everyone has. And so, yeah, I think that the opportunity for people to see that these special needs that certain people don't have access to are the same needs that everybody deserves and wants and should get. And so therefore, yeah, leveraging disability as a way of having a conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion, about truly valuing everyone for what they are and who they are and what they bring to the table. And one of the phrases that I use is that we should stop judging people based on what we think they cannot do. Instead, we should give people the opportunity to demonstrate what they can. Disability is one of the only things that we then look at someone and we assume that we know what they can't do, but then don't even go to the point of recognizing or acknowledging or letting that person show you what they can. And that's something that just personally, which because I can only really speak for myself, has been very frustrating, because I know the things that I can do, but I know the things that I'm being limited from doing simply because people don't give me access. And I have to acknowledge my own place of privilege, because it's only because of Deerfield, Stanford, Michigan, Yale, Notre Dame that then people end up listening to what I have to say. And that's no lie. I recognize that directly, that as a young Black disabled man, if people see me wheeling down the road, they don't assume that I have all those titles and pedigree. But then once they find out, which I'm not saying this is a good thing either, but once they find out, all of a sudden my words then have value, even though the words would have been coming out of the same mouth had they not known anything about those titles beforehand.
And at the same time, it gives you a platform, right? It gives you a platform to be able to, for you and I to have this conversation today, for you to be able to do the work that you do. I want to take something even further of what you were just saying, in the respect of You'd made a comment in one of your prior interviews around when we help people with disabilities, we actually help everybody. And you had mentioned something as simple as a ramp on a curb, right? And so when we think about moms with strollers or parents with strollers at a supermarket, at a grocery store, and the difficulty that it is when you take a stroller anywhere, no matter if it steps down a subway or to a bus or even across a curb on a grocery store, by addressing the needs of people with disabilities, we're actually helping so many more people really to be able to live easier, more comfortable, safer lives.
Yes, that's the element of universal design, because when we create structures that are accessible for everyone, right, or when you create a structure that is accessible for the individual with the greatest need, then everyone will be able to use that. But when we don't think about those individuals because they literally and figuratively don't have a seat at the table, I often extend that analogy and say when someone's not at the table, it's usually because the people didn't invite them to the room, but sometimes it's also because the door wasn't wide enough for them to get in, or the elevator didn't work in the building, or there was no ramp to get in the building in the first place. And so there are multiple levels, there are multiple steps, unintended, that could exclude individuals from being able to have that seat at the table. And we need to look at all of those steps from what the outside of the building looks like to getting into the building to then access inside the building for reasons why some people are being left behind. And so, yes, if we create these structures, if we create a system in a way that the individuals with disabilities are given access, you recognize that everybody is then gaining access. And what we're doing right now, for example, both sitting here in our homes on video cameras, this is something that people living with disabilities prior to this pandemic oftentimes were asking for the ability to work from home. But many companies thought there's no way you can get your job done from home. How do I know you're going to be working? How do I not know you're going to be surfing the web or doing this, that, or the other? And now everyone, virtually everyone, has some semblance of a remote work policy that then allows people with and without disabilities to be able to work. And so we see that some of these solutions that are necessary for individuals with disabilities are also supportive of individuals without them as well.
I want to pick back up on that particular theme around the way in which the pandemic has really impacted the lives of people with disabilities. But I want to touch back on something that you alluded to earlier in our conversation around the visibility of a disability, but yet feeling invisible as you're going through that experience. And you have talked a lot about, after your accident happened, feeling invisible and feeling not seen, not valued, not heard. Would you share with us more about that?
I will. And I think something that's important for me to point out, even before I dive into that too much, is that my disability is a visible one, right? And so oftentimes we talk about visible or apparent disabilities and invisible or non-apparent disabilities. And these are mental health illnesses or, autism or schizophrenia or anxiety and depression, learning disabilities. And so these are things that significantly impact people's daily lives as well. But when people see them, they assume that they don't have a disability. They assume that there's nothing, quote unquote, wrong with them, which I don't like the phrase wrong anyway, because someone said recently that there's nothing wrong with me. I'm just disabled, right? And disabled is not wrong. What is wrong is our structure and our society. And so that's the first thing that I want to make sure I mention, because I also sit in this place of privilege as an individual with an apparent or visible disability, that then it's a blessing and a curse, because people see what they think my limitations are, and they also think that they know what the solutions are to then be able to help me. But to go directly to your point, I recognize now that in a wheelchair, people avert their eyes. They assume that, I may need to ask them for help for something, and it's not often the case. And so it's this place where I'm a 6'1", 240-pound Black man, that usually I'm not someone that's invisible in most spaces. And I am also not someone that's quiet or shy. And so I'm usually very, very vocal wherever I am. And so it's hard to ignore my presence. With this disability, however, I see, I'm sorry, that would have been this thing going on for the next 5 minutes. With this disability, I've been able to see how people intentionally and unintentionally avoid me because of the discomfort that they have with it. And so it's something that, in my position, if I feel this way, I imagine what individuals that don't have the same sort of level of visibility that I had prior to my disability, that don't have jobs that put them in positions of power, that don't have a previous life that gave them opportunities and access to be able to then know inside themselves that they are worth more, that they can do more. Because individuals that were born with disabilities and grew up in a time where people did not expect much out of them, it takes a deep internal fortitude and then a support system that will tell you the contrary, to say that you are valued and you can do more. Because too often our society makes the excuse and then does not give someone the hope or the opportunity or the perception that they can do more, and they don't create those sort of spaces for them. And therefore, it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy where people then do not achieve as much as they could because people don't think that they can, and then they start to think that they can't either. So I realize this is a dangerous topic, and there are multiple aspects of it that warrant further discussion. But I do think that it's a multi-pronged sort of approach here to being able to create access for individuals so that they don't feel invisible. Because if you've lived your entire life in a structure that is proven to not be made for you, you then think that you don't belong there in the first place. And it's hard to see and it's hard to be something that you cannot see.
Let's talk a bit about what the pandemic has brought to light for the work that you do and for people with disabilities. And we were talking about remote work, and now companies are much more flexible and open and have had their own aha moments in the sense of how they realize that, oh, actually remote work does yield maybe even a higher degree of productivity if the corporate culture really facilitates and inspires that. But what else have you seen in the sense of the ways in which the pandemic has brought to surface new opportunities and the way in which it's reinforced some of the traditional challenges?
Yeah, so I was blessed to give a TED Talk a few months ago, and I talked about the two pandemics that we have right now, the pandemics of COVID-19 and racism. Now, those are just the two things that I chose. I also talked about ableism within that and the disabled population. But the point was to say that there are inequities that have existed long before COVID-19, which COVID-19 is just further exacerbating and bringing to light in a way that's difficult for people to ignore. And so I think that that is one thing that is a silver lining in this pandemic, is that I think people are noticing that we all live in this sense of intersecting Venn diagrams, where we used to think that we were operating and living in our own silos and that what you do does not impact what I do. And right now, everybody is concerned about what someone else is doing because of that someone else's ability to impact their own health. They wonder what the bagger at the grocery store did the night before and wonder if they're safe enough to be bagging their groceries. They wonder if the teller at the bank is someone that has washed their hands. They wonder if the gas station is somewhere where the person that came before them was someone that was COVID positive. So I think that we've now been forced to recognize that we are all much more interconnected than we were before, or than people thought we were before. And it has given people, I think, the opportunity to then try to see life through other people's lens and try to see some of the iniquities and injustices that have existed long before. Now, to not end with a negative, however, I think what it has also done is allowed people to be more creative and find solutions that then end up being more inclusive because of the way that we have to solve some of these problems. And so I think that while it is devastating and it's an atrocity that we've had to lose so many lives in this country and around the world to COVID-19, I think that if there's an opportunity for us to draw something from this, it is that I think that after this, quote unquote, knock on wood, if there will be an after this, then we will have a community and a country and a world that is much more cognizant of the impact that we have on people across the globe. Because the decisions we make based on the interconnected web of the world that we live in right now will and already have been impacting people elsewhere. And I think that it started to influence the decisions we make, the actions we take, the things that we invest in, the way that we support others, the fact that we can, galvanize support from around the world and country, utilizing some of these, networks and resources that exist, is the same thing that hopefully will bring people together to show that if you can tear people down from across the globe, you should be able to lift people up as well. And I think that that is the undercurrent of what this could be. And, you can use that for race, for gender, for, ability status, for socioeconomic status, because it is often the marginalized, underrepresented, and disenfranchised groups that have been impacted by this disproportionately. Mm-hmm. And I think that many people are recognizing that they were not doing as much as they could to support their fellow man and woman. And I think that that's hopefully something that we will do after this, is we'll be able to support one another a bit better.
Incredible insight. Thank you. And agree 2000% with everything you just said on so many different levels. I want to talk for a second about children. And before the show, you and I were talking about the complications of kids being in college now, young adults in college, and what that experience has meant to them at a critical time of their own coming of age. And yet we know that for children and students with disabilities, particularly for those with learning disabilities, COVID presents some really unique challenges. Can we talk a bit about that through the lens of medicine and healthcare, and what are you seeing in that space?
Yes. So as I've said, I think that I'm blessed with the position in which I'm sitting in. I'm a father to a 9-year-old who is currently a 4th grader doing virtual school. I'm the director of our Services for Students with Disabilities office, which is the office that provides accommodations for all students at the University of Michigan that have disabilities. And then I'm a family medicine physician at Michigan Medicine, taking care of people from all ages. And so I get to see it from multiple different lenses about how this has been impacting children, and children all the way from babies up to 18 years old, and specifically their education. Because providing wraparound services and sort of special education, and providing the resources that students need within the school system is difficult when then the school system is sort of split apart in the way that we used to know it. And I have seen within our own school system here in the Ann Arbor Public School System, them doing a really good job of making sure that they still continue to try to provide the resources that students need. But it's very difficult, as adults. Here we are living on the other side of cameras all day long, and that social interaction is critical for children's development. And when they don't have that in the same way, it's really hard to be able to do that for a student that is neurotypical or doesn't have any sort of disability, let alone for a student that then might have a learning disability or is autistic or dyslexia or any disability that then makes accessing education difficult. And that's something that we continue to see here at the college level, because students are really struggling with this virtual platform. Now, I say some of them are doing quite well, and some people really appreciate it because there are certain trade-offs that you get from this environment. And I know that some of my students that could benefit from sort of a noise-reduced environment with minimal distraction because of ADHD, are able to then focus a bit more without the multiple distractions of people in their classes or things that are happening around them.
Dr. O, your life changed in the course of one day when you were injured. And for many of us, we often don't think that day is going to come and impact us, right? But there's a probability that it could happen. And so from your perspective, as a physician and as someone who went through a personal experience such as your own, what do you recommend for us in the sense of how can we be better protected and better prepared for when life may throw us in a really material emergency critical situation?
I've had 7 years now to think about the different permutations of that answer. And I have multiple renditions that I give depending on the setting. And, one of them I'll acknowledge, yes, there was a day on July 4th, 2013, when I broke my neck and I was paralyzed from my chest down. So to many people, that is the turning point of my life. That is something that really was a real sort of paradigm shift, trajectory shift for me. Now, without being sort of too philosophical about this, I think that is not necessarily the case. I think many people look at my life and they think that was a point where everything changed. But I think that just goes to show that people expect or don't assume that someone with a disability will be able to do all of the things that they could potentially do. And so that to me was a mere bump in the road. And while I would not have asked for that to happen, I personally don't think that has derailed my life in a way that I'm not going to be able to achieve the things that I may have achieved before. And if you ask my mother will say that that's actually something that was used to humble me in a way to then make me more palatable. Because if I had just continued to, sort of look as if my life was easy and that I didn't have any sort of struggles, then trying to advocate for sort of marginalized populations would then have not made me seem relatable. Right now, before people started attacking my mother did not wish ill upon me and say that she wanted me to break my neck. But, as sort of Christ followers, we're not promised a life without struggle. And so that was just sort of one struggle and one hurdle that I've gone through. But, I think there are many other places in someone's life where things change, and you can't necessarily understand the impact of that change until years down the road. And there are many, many turning points that may have been the most pivotal point of their life. So I think that what I tell people is the cliche that people hear about living each day to the fullest, because you really don't know what will come the next day. Tomorrow is not promised for any one of us. And therefore, that is why I throw out all of the cliche catchphrases of treat your neighbor as yourself, because if you treat everyone else the way you hope to be treated, if you attempt to then create access for other people, if you're kind and respectful and you work hard and you just aim to make an impact, then I think none of us can actually prepare for the unknown. We can't, right? We can do our best to make sure that we will be prepared for whatever is thrown at us. But people often say to me, Feranmi, of all people, we knew that you'd be able to get through this. And that's a compliment. But I also want to say, tell me what about me prior to this made you think, oh, if any of our friends were to break their neck and become paralyzed, we knew you'd get through it. I'm not sure what litmus test you have that's the barometer for how someone will react to a spinal cord injury, right? So I know people mean well when they say it, but it always sort of makes me curious to say, I'm not quite sure what you mean, but any one of us has that in us. And I don't think that I did anything on my own. I was just blessed with the support systems and with things that I had before and things that I was given afterwards that have allowed me to get through it in this way. But I'm careful when I give this answer because I don't want people to think that if they don't overcome their disability, that they're weak in some way. And so to all people, whether you've had a spinal cord injury or any sort of visible apparent disability, or whether it was something that other people may see as seemingly small and insignificant, there are factors that will happen in your life that may drastically change what you had hoped for yourself, what others may have seen in you, but that does not define who you are. That does not limit your potential. And that is not sort of a prophecy as to what the rest of your life will be. And so, yes, things will happen. We can do our best to be prepared for them, but all we can then do is do our best after they happen to continue going along whatever path it is that we're on, whether it's the path we thought we were going to be on. Because for me personally, I know that I'm not the one orchestrating my steps and that there's a greater plan for me. And I'm just stumbling along trying to make sure that I do what I think I'm being told to do, because this is much bigger than me as an individual.
I wanted something really interesting that you've been mentioning. I want to pick up on the unique intersectionality of medicine and your faith. And you're a man of medicine, and you're also a man of faith. And talk to us a bit about what has that meant for you during your career, in the sense of all of your accomplishments and the work that you do each and every day.
So my faith is the foundation for everything that I do. I had a family that then made sure that they instilled that in us. And therefore, without my faith, I would not be here right now. I would not have the same sort of wherewithal that I feel as though I have through some of the toils and difficulties that we've gone through. And, regardless of what that faith is, I tell people that whether you're a Christian, whether you're Muslim, whether you're Jewish, whatever sort of practice, some people say that they're spiritual but not religious. And I say that whatever that guiding principle is in your life is, I think, what should help sort of guide you in terms of where you go. Now, that's something that oftentimes people then question how you can have that faith and be a physician. And I say, well, you know what? I am merely a vessel through which I say that my Lord is acting. And my parents taught me this because I saw my parents lose patients. And when they lost patients, they did not take blame for losing a patient as long as they did everything within their power to do the best they could. But for the same reason, they did not take credit for saving a life, because they also knew that that was not their doing alone. And so that's something that has helped sort of ground me in the way that I approach my patient care. But this disability has also given me a perspective that allows me to communicate with my patients in a way that I say, look, my goal is really just to optimize your life with you to the best of our ability. Whatever it is that you hope to be able to accomplish with the amount of time that we have here is what we will aim to do. And yes, based on the education I have, I may have some ideas as to how we can do that together. I may tell you that, smoking is probably bad, exercising is probably good, right? These are some things that I can help you with. But beyond that, we're just both human beings doing the best that we can to then live with the time that we're given. And so I think that gives me a unique perspective in terms of how I care for my patients, because I do not actually try to act as if I'm God. And I know that it's not going to be because I have done something right that a patient lives. And hopefully it will not be because I did something wrong that a patient dies. because death is the only guarantee that any one of us has. And I don't think that it should be seen as negative, because if death is negative, then the point of this life is just all negative. And I do think that we can all utilize the time that we have here, whatever amount of time that is, to then have a positive impact. And if you do that every single day, that is, I think, what we should strive for, because I can't promise a patient no pain. I can't promise them no injury, no struggle. But what I can do is say that we'll support you through that journey and then be able to then take whatever comes and hopefully make something positive out of it.
I love what you said around, really playing to your strengths to have a positive impact in the world, and shaping your life and your journey in that space, even though there may be ebbs and flows and different routes and different pivots that you may take along the way. But we do live in a moment in time in the United States where we're incredibly divided. And as we're entering into what some say could be the third surge of coronavirus, we know that, and the election, that we have a lot of work to do to heal as a country, let alone heal as a world, but particularly here in the United States, heal as a country. What are your thoughts on that as you think about your role in kind of the larger scheme of everything?
So I feel like I have been uniquely positioned based on multiple demographic factors and societal factors and personal factors that make me who I am, that I'll be careful. I don't think I'm any better than anyone else. I don't think that I'm more special than anyone else. But I do think that being a Nigerian, that has become a naturalized US citizen, being a Black man of color in this country, being a physician, being an individual with a physical disability, being a Christian, being someone who is, privileged with respect to my sort of socioeconomic status, such that finances aren't something that concern me on a day-to-day basis. Food is not something that concerns me on a day-to-day basis. I have certain privileges, but I have certain prejudices that are imposed upon me. I've been able to see this world and recognize true diversity, because there's no one group that I can see that's always right, and there's no one group that I can see that is always wrong. And I have been supported by people from all walks of life, from all shades and ages and colors. And I've also been discriminated against by people of all the same different types of things. And so therefore, I think it shows me that during this time, this divisiveness that we see really doesn't make any sense to me, right? And I'm not pointing fingers at any particular group of people. I do see this across the board. But what I do see is that when we have the opportunity to truly celebrate humanity and acknowledge the differences that we all have, but to not ostracize each other and exclude each other because of those differences, but instead to celebrate difference and to see how we can then utilize these differences to then make sure that we are acknowledging and addressing and providing access to all of the people in which we serve and all the people that we live with. That's, I think, what we should be doing. And I'll be honest and say that I'm not quite sure how we get there yet. I do see lots of people trying to do so. And that's what gives me the hope, because there are things that I tell people, that we're all humans. We are all humans, and we will all make mistakes. We will all sin. And therefore, I don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And if someone slights me in some way, this is where sort of my faith comes back in, is, I have to take out the log in my eye before I take out the splinter in someone else's. And I try to give people the benefit of the doubt and to not assume that everyone is going to be doing something negative. However, I'm absolutely not naive enough to then look beyond something that someone does intentionally do for negative and say that it's something else. Because I recognize that there are people that make bad decisions, there are people that have poor intentions, but there are people that are actively trying to do the opposite of that. So I'm not naive in thinking that the world is just one big happy place where everyone's out to help me. I also am not so pessimistic to believe that no one actually cares. So I do think that there's an opportunity for us to work together. There's an opportunity for us to truly, shed some of this, contentious conversations that happen around polarizing topics without actually getting to a solution, and instead figure out what we can do to work together to then truly benefit everyone. But, when I give some of these talks and we have conversations, it's when I recognize that, unfortunately, when you get to the bottom of it, there are people that don't agree with that. there are people that do not agree that we need to be working together for the benefit of everyone. And, this takes me back to, studying philosophy and ethics in school and learning about utilitarianism and, and all of the different sort of models that people practice. And not everybody thinks that the purpose is to then make sure that everybody gets, the same or equitable access to things. And that's sort of the basis for why some of these differences exist. But once again, I could talk about this particular thing all day, and I don't want to belabor that point. But I will end by saying that I do think that there is an opportunity for us to come together and support one another. But the way that we do that, I think, is actually by being familiar with one another, because people are not comfortable with things that they don't know. And I think that is where a lot of this comes from. That's where a lot of the fear and mistrust and anger comes from, is it's a lack of familiarity with things. Because in my life, I think that when people become familiar with something, when people learn about something, when they're more proximal to it, then people see how they are impacted by it. But if we continue drawing lines in the sand and say, this is your side and that is mine, we're not going to get a chance to actually interact with each other, human to human, to actually learn about how this impacts someone that I care about and how I am connected to this person in a way that I may not have known before having an opportunity to actually interact with them.
It's interesting because I can't help but think about all the binary constraints and definitions that we put around how we think about the isms, right? So we have men and women, we have black and white, we have straight and gay, and we have, either in your 20s or in your 70s, right? And so there's all these ways in which we really reduced identity to an either or construct. And I can't help but think about, in this period of time politically, we've done that to a large extent as well. Either you're staunchly a Republican or you're staunchly a Democrat, right? Without really understanding, to your point, the nuances and the points of commonality. Because in this moment in time, neither side's speaking to each other, right? Because we're so divided, or seemingly so divided on so many different issues. It was so interesting. 4 years ago at this time, I actually conducted and hosted a 3-part series called From All Sides of the Spectrum, What Women Really Want to Be Talking About During This Election Year. And each of those 3 sessions, I hosted one woman who was a very visible Republican and another woman who's a very visible Democrat. And we had a conversation. And I have to be honest with you that in very few instances were we actually in disagreement about any of the topics of conversation that were brought up over the course of those 3 weeks. And I can't help but think that this seems like a different time, but I really think by having different types of conversations and by, including people whose views may not be similar to your own, it's the same sort of outcome I would predict, in the sense of really, truly, what do we want as Americans, right? Like, we want to feel safe. We want to feel protected. We want to feel, welcome. We want to feel that we're being treated fairly and equally. And that spans no matter what political party you subscribe to. I want to mention a recent interview that you did on CNBC, where you were talking about the importance of consistency in the message and understanding appropriate safety protocols as it pertains to COVID. And I think this is a really good segue from what we were just talking about, from the perspective of that consistency of messaging. And we know that as we think about, the pandemic and the third wave, if that's in fact what we're going into, that messaging and the advisement and the safety protocols vary dramatically state by state, city by city. I wanted to get your thoughts on, the importance not just of consistency and messaging, but how do we achieve that in not just a moment in time where we're so divided as a country, but then when states are so divided in the sense of, how are they thinking about opening versus closing and really protecting the people that live within those borders?
That is a great question, Jan, because something that I've been seeing, I think I mentioned already that I sit on the president's COVID Campus Health Response Committee. Now, if we sort of break some of these things down and we look at it from just this little small spot, I am in the United States. I'm in the state of Michigan. I'm in the city of Ann Arbor. I'm at the University of Michigan, and I'm on this committee. And when I think about the number of meetings that we have with the number of people that we bring together to talk about the different implications of how we're going to manage the pandemic at the University of Michigan, and then I expand that out through each of those circles that I just mentioned. So if you go outside of the University of Michigan and you just go to the city of Ann Arbor, you go outside of Ann Arbor, you go to Washtenaw County, you go to outside of Washtenaw County, you go to the state of Michigan, and then the Midwest, and then the United States, right? The level of conversation and decision-making that needs to happen for a global pandemic of proportions we have never seen before nobody knows exactly what we're supposed to do. And that's something that I will go on record and say it again. No one has the blueprint for how we are going to then survive this. Yet we are trying our best to put together all the minds to then give some sort of message that is going to then give some reassurance to the American public. Now, I use that as the background because I even sit in some of these meetings, and there are times where I don't even understand all the different factors that we're discussing. And if I can feel that way sitting in a meeting at the Campus Health Response Committee level, imagine what the general public thinks when we then come out with these executive orders or these decrees and these mandates, and they're inconsistent across counties, across states, and it's something that people are not quite sure what to believe. And, and then it becomes even more problematic when individuals who conceivably have studied for years doing work then are not necessarily seen as credible any longer in terms of the feedback and the information that they're providing. And as you can see, I'm trying to be very careful not to seemingly single out any individual entities in terms of their ability or inability to have consistent messaging or support the science. But I think that the way that we get there is one, it takes humility on the side of those of us who are in medicine, in healthcare, in science, to acknowledge that we don't have all of the answers yet. But then it also takes grace on the part of the public to recognize that the lack of answers is not because of a lack of an attempt to get them. It's because this is something that is dynamic and it's happening real time. But then we do need to provide the answers to the questions that we have, because the other part that we hear often is that there's a lack of transparency and there's a lack of sharing of information. And people feel as though we have the information, but for specific reasons, we're choosing not to share it. So I can only speak about the experience here at Michigan, but I can tell you with 100% certainty that there is no ill intent in anyone at this institution. The decisions that are being made are not primarily financially driven, even though that's what people think. And we actually are taking into account all of the implications on people's lives that will happen. Because if we shut down this institution, there are many people who work here that rely upon that job to put food on the table for their families. And so there are factors in this that are really, really difficult to be able to single out. And the decisions that need to be made will then need the support of a unified voice to then be able to say, this is where we think we should be heading. And I think it should be very clear when we say what things are dangerous and what things are not, what is true about this virus and what is not. And we do have the ability to then disseminate those messages. And I think when those messages seemingly are muddied in terms of their clarity of how this is transmitted, how you can get it, what is safe and what is not safe, that is, I think that's really devastating and detrimental to our society's ability to then get beyond this. Because it is still very clear to me as a layperson and as a physician that there are people that have not taken this seriously still, that don't understand the true implications of it. And I will say that from where I sit, I cannot claim to be as proximal as some of my emergency medicine or ICU colleagues who have been in the thick of it much, much more than I have been. But as a primary care provider, as someone who was the physician lead for our COVID-19 hotline at the University of Michigan, I've spoken to countless patients that were worried about COVID. I've spoken to countless patients that have had COVID. I've had people in my life and in my patient population that have died from COVID. And so this is something that is real. It is something that is nothing like anything we have seen in anyone's lifetime that is living right now, or period. And therefore, I think it requires a level of respect for this virus and a time to really come together and to give a clear message as to what it is that we do know and how we can make it better. But understanding that there will be things that will change, and when they change, we'll give that information and we'll do our best to protect. But that this isn't the time to I'll be very honest, this is not the time to politicize a pandemic and make it such that people feel as though they're making decisions based on party and not based on the true information about this virus and how we can all be safe from it. So, I try not to speak about politics when I say these things, because I know that's a complicated, system. And I feel as though medicine frees me from the constraints of being concerned about politics because data speaks for itself, lives speak for themselves, and it's hard for me to disagree when I see firsthand the implications of this virus. And I'm doing everything I can to protect my family, to protect my students, to protect my patients, to protect my community. And I think that if everyone leads with that, then I think we'll be headed in the right direction.
When this is said and done, whatever that time period looks like, and however we define said and done to be at the end of this, what do you hope we remember about this period of time?
When this is said and done, what I hope that on the other side of this, we remember that it unfortunately took a pandemic of global proportions to bring us all together. I hope that at the end of this, that we don't have a conversation about why these things are still happening. We don't reference the coronavirus pandemic of 2020, 2021 when something happens again in 2036. I want this to be the last time that we are talking about the inequities that exist, that we talk about the injustices that exist. My hope is that we get one step closer to truly treating our neighbors as ourselves and to valuing each other. And I think that we can get there. I know that this sounds hopelessly optimistic, but I have seen it happening, and I have seen change happening at a rate that, even though I'm not the oldest person in the group, I have seen change happening at a rate that I have never seen happen in some of these large institutions. I've seen people that have truly invested their time and their energy in ways that senior people to me say that they had not seen before. And so I think that that is what we will come from out of this. We will see that people came together, they were creative, they were innovative, they were entrepreneurial, they were supportive, they were empathetic. They leveraged the resources that we had to then provide access for all people and not just for few. And that there will be fewer haves and have-not dichotomies, and there will actually be individuals that are striving to make this a better place for all people. That's what I hope we will get from this, and I think that we can do that, which doesn't mean that we eradicate all viruses that ever happen from now on. It doesn't mean that we use some sort of, eugenics to then make the human race someone that are, free from illness altogether. No, I do not think we're going to get there. We're not going to eradicate all pain and suffering, but I do think that the subsequent times that pain and suffering does hit, there will not be such a stark contrast between the people that it impacts and those that are free from it.
Dr. O, thank you so much for your insights and for your expertise and just for spending the hour with us. It's been an honor and a privilege to have you with us today, and we'd love to invite you back too. I'm sure that we'll have a lot to talk about as we progress into 2021 as well.
Well, maybe next time you have me back, I'll let you actually talk some, and we'll just be Really, I appreciate it. All right.
This has been a brilliant conversation, and thank you. Your words are so eloquent and so I think inspiring for what many of us are experiencing and feeling during this moment in time. How do our viewers stay in contact with you?
So my email, I'm actually fairly open to email, even though it went off multiple times during this alone. But my last name at UMICH. So Okanlami at umich.edu. OKANLAMI at umich.edu.
Feranmi, thank you so much for being with us here this afternoon. We cannot wait to invite you back for more insights and expertise as we together create this new world that we're forging ahead all together. I'm Jem Rashidams, the Vice President of U.S. Development with Join Mayshad. Please make sure to leave your comments and to like our video. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day. Hello, please make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and don't forget to hit the bell to receive notifications of all of our content.